It's 7 a.m. The sun is barely awake, birds are chirping like unpaid alarm clocks, and Marcus Hartwell, our protagonist, unwilling HOA gladiator and accidental suburban legend, is stumbling toward his front door. He's not expecting drama. At best, maybe it's Amazon dropping off another oversized box he doesn't remember ordering at 2 a.m. At worst, maybe it's the neighbor's kids selling candy bars for the 15th fundraiser of the year. But no, this isn't chocolate. This is chaos. Marcus swings open the door and bam, standing there are two sheriff's deputies. Not in casual, hey, we're checking in mode, but in full official stance. Clipboards out, papers ready. They look like substitute teachers about to hand out detention slips. And what's the charge? Brace yourself, parking his own truck in his own driveway. Yes, really. HOA rules can make the Twilight Zone look like Sesame Street. The deputies start with the standard script. Sir, you've been reported for an HOA violation requiring immediate compliance. Translation, some clipboard warrior with too much time on their hands complained, and now you're apparently a suburban outlaw for daring to use your driveway. Marcus is still rubbing the sleep from his eyes when the true magic moment arrives. Behind him, from the kitchen, comes Sarah, his wife. Not just any wife, though. Sarah is an 18-year veteran police detective, a lieutenant, the kind of person who can read a crime scene like most people read a cereal box. And today she's walking out in full uniform, badge polished, bars gleaming, coffee mug steaming like an exclamation point in her hand. The effect is instant. The deputies freeze. You could practically hear the Windows error sound go off in their heads. One of them literally takes a step back, the crunch of gravel under his boot echoing like a gunshot in the morning silence. The dew dripping off their patrol car windshield suddenly feels louder than anyone's heartbeat. These guys thought they were walking into a routine HOA nuisance case. Instead, they realize they're standing on the porch of a decorated detective's house. Awkward doesn't begin to cover it. For 6 long months, Marcus and Sarah had been fighting off petty harassment from their HOA president, Brenda, a.k.a. the neighborhood's self-appointed Napoleon. But this was the grand finale of Brenda's campaign of nonsense. She had gone nuclear and called in law enforcement, thinking it would intimidate Marcus into submission. Instead, she accidentally staged the most embarrassing neighborhood theater possible, sending cops to a cop's house. Think about the optics here. Deputies, tasked with enforcing a civil complaint over a driveway, now have to face one of their own senior officers, calm, collected, sipping her coffee while they shuffle papers about grass height and truck placement. It's like trying to lecture Gordon Ramsay about how to scramble eggs. Wrong person, wrong move, wrong universe. And Marcus? He's standing there enjoying every second because after 6 months of sleepless nights, ridiculous fines, and neighborhood gossip, watching the HOA's power trip backfire in spectacular fashion was pure, unfiltered vindication. Now, here's the thing about HOA drama. It's never just about what's on the surface. On paper, it's a truck in the driveway. In reality, it's about control. HOAs thrive on enforcing the pettiest rules possible, rules that often sound more like parody than governance. Your grass can't be 3 inches instead of 2.5. Your Christmas lights must be warm white, not cool. Your car can't be visible unless it's shiny enough to blind astronauts on the International Space Station. But when you add law enforcement to that equation, you've officially jumped the shark. The deputies, to their credit, handled the situation like professionals. They realized quickly that this wasn't a criminal matter, and the papers they carried were about as enforceable as a kid's lemonade stand permit. Still, their body language screamed one thing: we don't want to be here. And honestly, who could blame them? This single moment, the frozen deputies, the steaming coffee mug, the stunned silence, became the turning point. It spread through the neighborhood like gossip at a church potluck. Did you hear? Brenda called the cops on the cops! Suddenly, the HOA's iron grip looked more like a clown show, and Marcus and Sarah weren't just fighting back. They were winning in the court of public opinion. Here's the kicker. This moment didn't just happen out of nowhere. No, no, no. This morning standoff was the dramatic opening scene of a much longer, messier saga. To really understand how we got here, why two deputies found themselves face to face with a detective in her bathrobe's deadlier cousin, you've got to rewind the tape. Because this wasn't Marcus's first rodeo with HOA harassment. Oh no. This battle had roots, ugly, messy roots, that went all the way back to a divorce, a new house, and a neighborhood tyrant with a Lexus and way too much free time. So buckle up, because this isn't just about one morning standoff. It's about the twisted road that got us there, and trust me, if you thought the deputies freezing was shocking, wait until you hear how Marcus's ex-wife managed to turn HOA bylaws into her personal weapon of mass destruction. Every great war story has an origin. And in Marcus Hartwell's case, the battlefield didn't start in the driveway, it started in divorce court. And let me tell you, his ex-wife wasn't just good at breaking hearts, she was elite level at weaponizing HOA bylaws like they were part of her divorce settlement arsenal. Now picture this. Marcus is 45. Mid-divorce, clinging to his sanity like a cat on a ceiling fan. His ex-wife isn't content with just taking half his savings, the BMW and the suburban McMansion. No, that would have been too easy. Instead, she decides to go full petty tyrant and use the HOA rulebook as if it were her personal playbook for revenge. Think of it as The Art of War, but written in Comic Sans by a board president with a clipboard fetish. First strike, noise complaints. Every time Marcus started his work truck at 7 a.m., ding, violation. Doesn't matter that trash trucks were thundering by at 6:30 a.m., waking up the entire neighborhood like alarm clocks powered by diesel. Nope. Apparently Marcus's humble work truck was the real enemy of peace. Second strike, holiday decorations. Marcus strung up his Christmas lights, feeling festive, maybe even a little optimistic in the middle of all this personal chaos. But oh, his mistake was tragic. They weren't warm white, they were, gasp, non-conforming. The HOA rulebook demanded conformity like it was North Korea's aesthetic committee. For that slip-up, he got slapped with a fine. Imagine losing your marriage and your right to twinkle lights in the same month. Brutal. And this wasn't just random nitpicking. It was surgical harassment. His ex had the HOA on speed dial. She scheduled emergency meetings during his custody time, as if the bylaws themselves were child custody grenades. Marcus quickly realized the HOA wasn't just a nosy neighbor organization. In the wrong hands, it was a weapon. And his ex wielded it with the precision of a sniper. Now, to be fair, Marcus wasn't exactly naive. He knew divorce could be messy. He just didn't expect the HOA to be used like an army of unpaid mercenaries. His ex turned neighbors into informants, transformed committee meetings into kangaroo courts, and weaponized rules that most people don't even know exist. You think you're safe because you mow your lawn? Wrong. Your grass blade length might just become Exhibit A in your ex's next ambush. At one point, Marcus said it felt like he was getting financially butchered in the ugliest divorce this side of hell. And honestly, he wasn't exaggerating. By the time the dust settled, his ex walked away with the McMansion, the BMW, and half of his life savings. What did Marcus get? A truck, a toolbox, and a masterclass in HOA tyranny. Oh, and let's not forget, a blood oath to never again live under the thumb of another HOA. He vowed that the next house he bought would be HOA-free, no matter what. He said, "I'd rather live in a shipping container than under another HOA." And it wasn't really a joke. That's how bad it had gotten. For Marcus, HOA rules weren't quirky community guidelines anymore. They were weapons of mass destruction, deployed by people who think power means deciding what shade of beige your house is allowed to be. And here's the thing. Marcus wasn't alone. Divorce attorneys will quietly tell you, HOA rules get dragged into custody disputes more often than you'd think. It's the ultimate passive-aggressive tool. You don't have to fight your ex in court when you can just sick the HOA on them and let the fines, letters, and violations do the dirty work. Marcus was living proof of how ugly that can get. But there's a silver lining in every nightmare, and for Marcus, the divorce taught him a valuable lesson. Freedom isn't just financial, it's residential. If you don't control where you live, someone else will. And 9 times out of 10, that someone is a nosy neighbor with a badge that says HOA board member, but should really just say neighborhood dictator. So, when the ink dried on the divorce papers and Marcus was finally free, he set his sights on one thing: a house with no HOA strings attached. A place where he could park his truck, hang his Christmas lights in whatever color he wanted, and maybe even enjoy the radical act of leaving a garden hose on the lawn overnight without risking a fine. Of course, fate wasn't going to let Marcus ride off into the sunset that easily, because while he thought he was escaping the HOA nightmare, he was really just trading one kind of chaos for another. Because that's when he met her. The woman who would make his ex-wife look like a kind-hearted saint, the suburban hurricane, the measuring tape queen, the Lexus-driving dictator of Stonegate Estates. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce you to Hurricane Delilah.
If Marcus thought the universe was done punishing him after divorce court and HOA snipers for hire, he was wrong. Because just as he was starting to rebuild his life, along came a new storm, one with stilettos, a Lexus, and a smile sharp enough to slice through drywall. Her name? Delilah Vance. Now, every neighborhood has that neighbor. You know the type. They treat the cul-de-sac like it's their personal kingdom, patrol with the intensity of a border guard, and somehow always have time to send emails about your trash can being 3 inches too far left. But Delilah wasn't just that neighbor. She was the Michael Jordan of HOA dictators. If Michael Jordan measured grass height instead of sinking three-pointers. Delilah rolled into Stonegate Estates like a one-woman political campaign. Within 3 weeks of moving in, she launched a scorched earth blitz to become HOA president. And she didn't just campaign. Oh no, she weaponized fear. Her flyers looked like they were designed by a horror movie marketing team, before and after shots of neighbors' yards, complete with giant blood-red X's over violations. It was less community improvement and more neighborhood purge. And her platform? Pure suburban dictatorship, protecting property values, maintaining community standards, preserving family-oriented lifestyles. Sounds wholesome until you realize it really means you breathe wrong, you're fined. Here's the kicker. Delilah wasn't just good at scare tactics, she was built for this role. By day, she worked middle management at an insurance company specializing in claim denials. Yes, you heard that right. Her actual job was saying no for a living. If there was ever a career training program for HOA dictators, Delilah had graduated top of her class. Her true calling, however, was neighborhood domination. Picture it. Every morning, she'd climb into her sleek black Lexus, circle the neighborhood like a shark, and photograph violations with the obsessive dedication of a paparazzi stalking an A-list celebrity. A misplaced recycling bin? Click. A lawn chair left out overnight? Click. Christmas lights left up in January? Double click. She wasn't just watching, she was building a case file, one photo at a time. Marcus first encountered Delilah in the most cinematic way possible. He was under his truck, elbows deep in motor oil, fixing up what he loved most, his ride. Then he heard it. The sharp click-clack of stilettos on gravel. Not just footsteps, an execution countdown. He looked up, and there she was. Delilah, HOA clipboard clutched like a sword, manila folder thicker than a Stephen King novel, and a smile so fake it could have been sponsored by Botox. "Welcome to our community," she purred, as if she were auditioning for a villain role in a Netflix drama. Then she shoved what she called a mandatory compliance orientation package into Marcus's oil-stained hands. Inside, HOA bylaws thicker than a Stephen King novel, annual dues demanding $850, and forms requiring approval for everything from mailbox color to grass height. Marcus, bless his soul, actually laughed. He wiped the grease from his hands, looked her dead in the eye, and said, "Ma'am, wrong house. I'm not in your HOA." And that's when the mask slipped. Her smile didn't just falter, it shattered. One of her eyes twitched like a glitching video game character.
She whipped out a hand-drawn map that looked like it was scribbled during a preschool art project. "You're clearly within our boundaries," she hissed. Marcus calmly pulled out his actual survey documents, official paperwork stamped by the county, proof that his century-old farmhouse predated Stonegate Estates by 80 years. He pointed to the line on the map, explaining with military precision, "Your development ends here. My property starts 15 feet east, has since 1943. Game, set, match." But Delilah wasn't built to lose. Her face twisted into a smile that belonged in a true crime documentary. "We'll see about that," she whispered, and Marcus swears the temperature dropped 10 degrees in that moment. You know how movies add a creepy violin sting when the villain appears? Yeah, that was real life with Delilah. From that day on, Marcus knew two things. One, his farmhouse was the last fortress of freedom standing against Stonegate's suburban army. And two, Delilah was about to make his life hell. She wasn't just an HOA president, she was a hurricane in heels. And like any hurricane, she came prepared to flatten everything in her path, whether it was fences, families, or common sense. And her first storm surge? Paperwork. Because nothing says power trip than turning ordinary city codes into weapons. Buckle up, because next we'll see how Delilah turned red tape into razor wire, and how Marcus fought back with bureaucracy sharper than her stilettos. If Delilah had a superpower, it wasn't her smile that could curdle milk, or her Lexus that screamed, "Lease payments are due." No, her true weapon of choice was paperwork. Forget swords, forget guns. Delilah believed in red tape. Bureaucracy was her battlefield, and she wielded city codes like they were medieval war hammers. See, Marcus wasn't just living his life quietly. He was doing what good neighbors do, helping people out. He'd fix a teacher's brake pads in his garage, change the oil for a single mom down the street, or tighten up a neighbor's squeaky fan belt. Nothing shady, nothing illegal, just honest work, powered by motor oil, wrenches, and goodwill. The kind of thing Norman Rockwell would have painted if he lived next to a garage. But Delilah? Oh, she didn't see community spirit. She saw a zoning violation jackpot. One afternoon, Marcus got a letter that might as well have been wrapped in villain music. According to Delilah's complaint to the city, he was running an illegal automotive repair business out of his garage. She wanted inspectors on the case, fines issued, and Marcus shut down like a lemonade stand in a tax raid. And this wasn't some half-baked complaint either. No, Delilah had done her homework. She combed through city codes like a grad student cramming for finals. She found obscure ordinances about home-based businesses, noise thresholds, zoning rules, stuff 99% of people don't even know exists. She bundled it all up, sprinkled in some exaggerations, and fired it off to City Hall like a bureaucratic missile. Now here's where most people would panic. Most folks would look at an official letter threatening $200 a day fines and crumble like stale cookies. But Marcus? He had something Delilah didn't count on. Experience. Back in the Navy, Marcus had learned one golden rule. Every regulation has another regulation that trumps it. It's like rock, paper, scissors, except with government forms. The trick is knowing which paper beats which. And Marcus, he played the paperwork game like a seasoned gambler. First, he dug into his files. Turns out, months earlier, he'd already applied for and obtained a legitimate business license. Not only that, he double-checked the zoning laws before buying his farmhouse. And guess what? His area allowed home-based auto repair as long as he wasn't running a full-blown dealership with a neon sign out front. Translation, Marcus was completely compliant. So what did he do? He didn't hide. He didn't dodge. He leaned in. Marcus called the city inspector himself. Yep, he basically invited the referee to come blow the whistle. Bold? Absolutely. Crazy? Maybe. Effective? Oh, without a doubt. Inspector Rodriguez showed up with a clipboard expecting chaos. What he found instead was a garage so organized it could have doubled as a Navy workshop. Tools lined up with military precision, licenses framed and hanging like diplomas, and a repair setup that met every regulation down to the letter. Rodriguez even complimented Marcus's efficiency. Textbook compliant, he said, signing off with a smile. It was a slam dunk. Marcus didn't just pass, he turned the whole inspection into a flex. And the cherry on top? He documented every step. Photos, signatures, time-stamped records, the works. Sarah, his detective wife, had drilled it into him. When you're up against dirty players, documentation is your best weapon. Meanwhile, Delilah was probably in her Lexus, waiting to hear that Marcus's garage was condemned. Instead, she got news that he passed with flying colors, inspector approved. Ouch. That sound you hear, that's the noise of an HOA president grinding her teeth hard enough to power a blender. Here's the thing, though. Marcus wasn't just playing defense anymore. He was learning the game, and he realized HOA wars aren't all that different from actual investigations. The rule book might look scary, but if you know how to read it, you can flip it right back on the enforcers. And yet, if Delilah was frustrated before, this victory sent her completely off the rails. She had tried weaponizing bureaucracy, but Marcus had built himself a paperwork shield. So she escalated. And this time, she didn't just target Marcus, she aimed her sights at the one person she should have left alone. Sarah, the detective, because if you thought calling city inspectors on Marcus was bold, wait until you hear how Delilah tried to file a complaint against Sarah's police cruiser. Yes, really. She went after the cop's car. And that's when this HOA feud gone from petty to downright legendary.
Up to this point, Delilah had been annoying, petty, the type of HOA president who measures your grass with the same seriousness NASA uses to measure rocket fuel. But what she did next? That's the kind of move that makes you pause mid-sentence and ask, is this woman for real? See, after failing to shut down Marcus's garage with her city code kamikaze strike, Delilah needed a new target. And instead of backing off, she made the single worst decision of her HOA career. She went after Sarah. Sarah wasn't just Marcus's wife. She was an 18-year veteran detective lieutenant. You don't mess with someone who has built a career reading crime scenes like cookbooks. Sarah didn't just wear the uniform, she was the uniform. Calm, sharp, unflappable. The kind of woman who could stare down a suspect and make them confess without saying a word. But Delilah, she thought she could break her. Her complaint was as jaw-dropping as it was idiotic. She filed an official HOA violation against Sarah's police cruiser. Yes, you heard that right. The same department-issued, fully authorized police vehicle Sarah was required to take home under departmental policy. Delilah argued that the cruiser violated the HOA's ban on commercial vehicles. She claimed it was unsightly, intimidating, and made families uncomfortable. Let's pause here. This is like walking into a fire station and saying, excuse me, could you move that fire truck? It's scaring my begonias. Or asking the military to park their tanks at Walmart because they don't match your community's color palette. It was petty, it was audacious, it was also completely detached from reality. When Sarah read the complaint, she didn't explode. She didn't shout. She didn't even roll her eyes. Instead, she reacted with the quiet, razor-sharp professionalism that made her such a force on the job. She gathered her paperwork, department policies authorizing take-home vehicles, city ordinances confirming compliance, and records proving she was 100% within her rights. Then she submitted her response with the same tone you'd use to correct a child who insisted the sky is green. Calm, precise, absolutely devastating. But inside, oh, Marcus could tell the switch had flipped. That night at dinner, Sarah's knife cut through her steak with a little too much force. She leaned back, cool as ice, and said, "She just made this about my career. That was a serious mistake." And Marcus knew what that meant.
Delilah hadn't just crossed a line, she'd pole vaulted over it, landed in the danger zone, and was now poking a sleeping bear with a stick dipped in honey. Because here's the thing about police officers. They know how to build cases. They know how to track patterns, connect dots, and gather evidence until the truth crushes lies like a steamroller over wet pavement. Sarah didn't just shrug this off. No, this turned the feud from neighborhood squabble to official investigation mode. The audacity of Delilah's move didn't just rattle Marcus and Sarah, it sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. Neighbors whispered about it on morning walks. Did you hear? The HOA president actually filed a complaint against a detective squad car? It was the kind of gossip that traveled faster than Wi-Fi, and each retelling made Delilah look more unhinged. Some neighbors laughed it off. She's lost it. Others grew nervous. If Delilah was bold enough to target a police lieutenant, what chance did they have against her? Fear and resentment started to spread like cracks in a sidewalk. And Sarah, being who she was, started noticing a pattern. She talked with Frank, the elderly veteran next door, who confessed Delilah had cited him because his fence was supposedly 2 inches too tall. Then Jessica, the exhausted nurse down the street, admitted she'd been written up for leaving her baby stroller on the porch overnight. Sarah's detective brain clicked into gear. This wasn't random nitpicking. It was selective harassment. Marcus watched as Sarah transformed their dining room table into a detective's war desk. Papers spread out, dates highlighted, violation notices stacked in piles. "Look at this pattern," she said, pointing to the violations. "Some people get fined for everything. Others, they get free passes. That's not enforcement, that's discrimination." Marcus realized in that moment, this wasn't just about his truck. It wasn't even about Sarah's cruiser. This was about power, how it was being abused, who was being targeted, and why. And now a detective was on the case. Delilah thought she was tightening the screws. Instead, she'd just lit the fuse. And here's the kicker. Harassment is one thing, but money? Oh, money talks louder than HOA gossip at a block party. Because when Sarah and Marcus followed the paper trail, they discovered the real reason Delilah fought so hard for control. It wasn't about grass height or strollers. It was about thousands of dollars mysteriously vanishing into Delilah's pockets.
If Delilah's obsession with trucks, cruisers, and Christmas lights felt over the top before, buckle up. Because it turns out her true power trip wasn't fueled by petty fines at all. Nope. At the core of this HOA circus was something far more universal, far more predictable, and far more poisonous: money. See, while neighbors were arguing over whether strollers counted as unsightly storage, Delilah was quietly turning the HOA into her personal ATM. Forget property values, forget community standards. All that fine talk about protecting the neighborhood? Yeah, it was basically a smokescreen for an old-fashioned grift. Here's how the scheme worked. As HOA president, Delilah had access to the budget, and with that access came opportunity. Sweet, golden opportunity. She wasn't just a stickler for the rules. She was skimming, funneling, and flat-out draining community funds with the finesse of a Wall Street hustler. The numbers don't lie. Marcus, Sarah, and their little band of neighbors dug into the HOA's finances and uncovered the smoking gun. Delilah was raking in $2,400 a month in consulting fees. Consulting for what? Who knows? Probably for consulting herself in the mirror every morning. For perspective, that's almost $30,000 a year for a volunteer position. Volunteer my foot. But that wasn't the worst part. Delilah had an ace up her sleeve. Her brother-in-law, Derek. Derek owned a construction company, and guess who got 85% of all HOA contracts for community improvements? That's right. Pool maintenance? Derek. Landscaping? Derek. Snow removal? Derek. Even mailbox repairs? Derek. It was like the Oprah meme, but for contracts. You get a contract. You get a contract. Oh, wait. Only Derek gets a contract. And every single contract came in just under $25,000. A very interesting number. Why? Because HOA rules required homeowner approval for contracts above that threshold. By keeping every project at $24,900, Delilah conveniently bypassed the homeowner vote and handed sweetheart deals straight to Derek. Subtle? Not at all. Effective? For a while, yes. The kicker, the jobs themselves were ridiculously overpriced. Landscaping that should have cost $15,000 was billed at $21,000. Pool maintenance inflated by nearly 40%. Even trash collection, the most basic of services, cost nearly double what neighboring communities paid. The neighborhood wasn't just being micromanaged, it was being robbed blind. Now, Marcus had smelled something fishy for a while. He wasn't the type to just pay fees without asking where they went. And Sarah? She had the instincts of a fraud detective. When they finally laid the numbers side by side, the picture was crystal clear. Nearly $350,000 had vanished from HOA funds over 3 years. Poof, gone. Evaporated into Delilah's consulting fees and Derek's padded contracts. That's when Sarah leaned back in her chair, eyes cold, and said, "This isn't just mismanagement. This is fraud." And she was right. Because here's the thing, HOA boards don't just answer to themselves, they have a fiduciary duty to the homeowners. That's a fancy way of saying you're supposed to manage other people's money responsibly, not treat it like your personal piggy bank. When you cross that line, it stops being bad leadership and starts being criminal behavior. But here's the delicious irony. While Delilah thought she was the master of red tape, she'd underestimated Sarah. Fraud cases were her bread and butter. Every missing dollar was another breadcrumb leading straight back to Delilah. Every padded contract was a neon sign flashing, "Kickbacks here!" The neighborhood, once cowed into silence by Delilah's constant harassment, started waking up. People weren't just annoyed anymore. They were furious. Because fines sting, but theft unites people like nothing else. Suddenly, families who'd been quietly grumbling about their HOA dues realized that they weren't paying for community beautification. They were paying for Delilah's power trip and Derek's new truck. And Marcus? He was more motivated than ever. This wasn't about driveway parking anymore. This was about justice. About exposing a system that had bullied him, his wife, and their neighbors, and had the audacity to steal from them while doing it. It's one thing to find someone for grass height. It's another thing to quietly siphon hundreds of thousands of dollars under everyone's nose. Delilah thought nobody would notice that her little paper empire was untouchable. But she forgot the golden rule of HOA wars. Every tyrant eventually leaves a paper trail. And once Marcus and Sarah followed that trail, they knew they couldn't fight this battle alone. Because to take down an HOA president like Delilah, you don't just need paperwork, you need an army, which is exactly what they built next. By now, Marcus and Sarah had realized they weren't fighting a neighbor with a clipboard. They were fighting a one-woman racket. Delilah the dictator, queen of contracts, duchess of petty fines. But you don't take down a queen alone. Nope. To dethrone an HOA tyrant, you need allies. You need a coalition. You need the neighborhood Avengers. It didn't start as a grand rebellion. It started with whispered conversations over fences and quiet complaints during morning walks. Delilah cited me for a stroller, Jessica confessed, dark circles under her eyes from juggling nursing shifts and a toddler. She called it unsightly storage. A stroller. Like I'm lowering property values with Pampers? Then there was Frank, the Korean War vet with more grit in his handshake than most people have in their entire lives. One morning, coffee mug in hand, he muttered, "She told me my fence is 2 inches too tall. Been standing for 15 years, passed every inspection. Now suddenly it's a crime?" His eyes, usually twinkling with old soldier humor, were heavy with quiet anger. It turned out nearly everyone had a story. A misplaced trash can, a lawn that grew half an inch too tall during a rainstorm, a garden gnome that was deemed aesthetic non-compliance. Delilah had been waging a war of attrition, harassing neighbors one by one, keeping them isolated and demoralized. But Marcus and Sarah saw the bigger picture. It wasn't random. It was selective enforcement. And so the coalition began to form. Frank, the war vet, became their historian. Turns out he'd been keeping meticulous records of every violation notice he and others had received. Military habits die hard, and his notes stretched back years. Dates, times, even minutes from meetings that had mysteriously disappeared from official records. He wasn't just a neighbor. He was their archive. Jessica, the nurse, brought her own kind of battle skill: organization. If you can manage a night shift, raise a toddler, and still remember to bring snacks to the PTA meeting, you can run a rebellion. She started connecting neighbors who thought they were alone in their harassment. Pretty soon, she had a list: 23 families, all fined, all selectively targeted. And guess what? They all fit the same profile. Working class, military families, single parents. The pattern was undeniable. Then came Robert, the accountant from 3 houses down. If Marcus's garage was a temple of tools, Robert's home office was a shrine to spreadsheets. He dug into the HOA's finances like it was a forensic audit, and what he found made everyone's stomach turn. Reserve funds that should have been $400,000 were sitting at just $47,000. Contracts weren't just inflated, they were practically daylight robbery with paperwork attached. And then, as if the coalition needed one final ace, Maria entered the picture. A real estate attorney who'd moved in 6 months earlier, she brought a scalpel to this blunt force mess. Maria explained that state law gave homeowners the right to recall board members through petitions. Not only that, but she outlined how fiduciary breaches, like funneling contracts to your brother-in-law, could lead to personal liability and even criminal charges. Suddenly, this wasn't just an HOA feud. This was a legal powder keg. Each neighbor brought their unique skills. Sarah contributed detective-level evidence collection, photographing violations, documenting dates, preserving chain of custody. Marcus contributed military-style organization, charts, timelines, battle plans. Frank brought decades of records. Jessica built the network. Robert dissected the finances. Maria crafted the legal strategy. It was like Ocean's 11, but instead of robbing a casino, they were exposing one. For the first time, Marcus felt like they weren't on defense anymore. They weren't just dodging fines and fighting inspections. They were going on the offensive. And the more neighbors joined, the stronger they became. What had started as whispered complaints turned into late-night meetings in Marcus's garage, where the smell of coffee and motor oil mixed with the sound of strategy sessions. They pinned charts on the walls. They mapped violation patterns. They compared financial records. Sarah even joked that their garage looked more like a detective's war room than a repair shop. And honestly, she wasn't wrong. The coalition gave Marcus something he hadn't felt since this nightmare began: hope. Because HOAs thrive on isolation, they pick people off one by one. But when neighbors realized they weren't alone, something powerful happened. Fear turned into resolve. Resentment turned into unity. The dictatorship of Delilah suddenly didn't look so invincible. And Delilah, oh, she noticed the shift. Like any dictator sensing rebellion, she doubled down. Suddenly, tires were slashed. Flyers appeared on windshields, painting Marcus and Sarah as troublemakers. Anonymous 911 calls started flooding the police about suspicious activity at their address. It was desperation, disguised as intimidation. But here's the thing about desperation. It's loud. And the louder Delilah got, the more obvious it became that she was losing control. And when dictators lose control, they get reckless. Which brings us to the next chapter of this saga: sabotage, smear campaigns, and one HOA president who thought she could lie her way out of everything until Marcus and Sarah caught her red-handed. If HOA Wars were a movie, this is the point where the villain starts throwing kitchen sinks, anvils, and everything else they can get their hands on. Delilah, already cornered by Marcus, Sarah, and their growing coalition, decided to escalate. And not just a little, she went full-blown cartoon villain. Sabotage, smear campaigns, and false police reports. Because nothing says, I'm innocent, like framing your neighbors for crimes they didn't commit. It started small, like all bad escalations do. Marcus came out one morning to find his mailbox door hanging loose, screws mysteriously missing. Not broken from wear, not knocked by accident. No, this was deliberate. The HOA president, who claims to care about community standards, was literally vandalizing the community's mailboxes. Irony, thy name is Delilah. Next, trash mysteriously appeared on Marcus's lawn. Not his trash. Half-eaten fast food bags, soda cans, cigarette butts, the kind of junk you'd never catch him leaving behind. Sarah, with her detective eye, noticed something immediately. The bags were all from the same chain restaurant on the far side of town, a place Marcus and Sarah never went. Coincidence? Please. This was amateur hour sabotage. But the real madness started when Delilah began dialing 911 like it was her personal HOA enforcement hotline. Suddenly, reports started coming in. Suspicious activity at Marcus's address. Possible illegal business operation. Noise complaints at midnight when the street was silent enough to hear a pin drop. Marcus counted at least 7 false police reports in 1 month alone. 7! That's not just petty, that's pathological. And here's the kicker. The same deputies who had once frozen on his porch because Sarah walked out in uniform, they were the ones now getting dispatched to answer these bogus calls. Imagine the awkward car ride. So, boss, we're being sent back to your house. Again. Sarah handled it with her usual calm. She documented everything. Every false report. Every call, every incident logged with dates, times, and case numbers. She even pulled body cam footage and CAD logs when necessary. Why? Because she knew the golden rule. Harassment cases live and die on patterns, and Delilah was handing her a pattern on a silver platter. Meanwhile, Delilah launched a parallel smear campaign. Flyers started showing up in mailboxes, anonymous, of course, claiming Marcus was running an unlicensed chop shop and Sarah was using her badge to intimidate neighbors. The irony of accusing a decorated detective of intimidation while you yourself vandalized mailboxes? Delicious. Marcus even caught Delilah sneaking around one night. He was out back securing tools when he heard the crunch of gravel. There she was, crouched near his fence line, flashlight in hand, trying to snap evidence photos of his garage. Marcus, ex-Navy, didn't yell or charge. He simply clicked on his floodlights, flooding the yard in white-hot beams. Delilah froze like a raccoon in a dumpster. Marcus leaned against the doorway and said, deadpan, "Smile for the cameras." He had installed security cameras weeks earlier. And oh, did those cameras pay off. Footage of Delilah trespassing, vandalizing, and planting trash became the coalition's smoking gun. Neighbors who once feared her suddenly had proof that their president wasn't some righteous enforcer. She was a saboteur. The coalition went into overdrive. Frank the vet distributed copies of the footage. Jessica, the nurse, organized a neighborhood meeting where the videos played on a projector. The room's reaction? Gasps, then whispers, then open outrage. One neighbor muttered, "We paid dues for this?" Another flat out shouted, "She's lost her damn mind!" And Delilah, instead of backing down, she doubled down. She accused Marcus of doctoring the footage. She claimed Sarah was conspiring against her in her capacity as a detective. She even tried to file an ethics complaint against Sarah with the police department. Bold? Yes. Smart? Absolutely not. Because Sarah's department took one look at her spotless record and Delilah's mountain of harassment and laughed her out of the building. But here's where Delilah really sealed her fate. One of those false 911 calls had involved claiming Marcus was brandishing a weapon in his yard. That's not just petty harassment. That's a felony-level false report. Had deputies not recognized the address, it could have ended with SWAT at Marcus's doorstep, guns drawn. Delilah wasn't just being cruel, she was being dangerously reckless. Sarah documented that call with extra care. Date, time, dispatcher notes, audio logs. That single false 911 call elevated the case from nuisance to potential criminal prosecution. And the neighborhood coalition? They weren't just mad now, they were furious. This wasn't about fines or bylaws anymore. This was about safety. When you weaponize 911, you put lives at risk. And suddenly, even neighbors who'd stayed neutral realized they couldn't sit on the sidelines anymore. Delilah wanted to intimidate Marcus and Sarah into submission. Instead, she radicalized the entire community. And once the neighbors united, they didn't just grumble at HOA meetings. They staged a full-on rebellion, petitions, legal filings, recall votes. And when the smoke cleared, Delilah's empire of pettiness started crumbling brick by brick. By this point, Delilah had crossed every line imaginable. Harassment? Check. Fraud? Check. Sabotage? Triple check. And now she'd weaponized 911 like it was her personal HOA hotline. That was the final straw. The community didn't just want her gone. They wanted her dethroned in a way so official, so permanent, that she couldn't weasel her way back with another Lexus and clipboard campaign. Enter the rebellion. It began in Marcus's garage, naturally, the unofficial headquarters of the anti-HOA coalition. Neighbors crammed into the space, coffee mugs in hand, surrounded by stacks of evidence, spreadsheets, and Sarah's meticulous detective-style wall of notes. Frank, the veteran, called the meeting to order like it was a mission briefing. Jessica handed out copies of a petition. Robert, the accountant, projected Delilah's cooked books on the garage wall like they were slides at a fraud seminar. The mood was electric. People weren't whispering anymore. They were angry, united, and ready to fight back. Maria, the attorney neighbor, laid out the legal strategy. Under state law, we can recall any board member with signatures from 25% of homeowners. If we can get that number, we force a vote. If the majority agrees, Delilah's out, effective immediately. It was like throwing gasoline on a fire. Suddenly, clipboards weren't just Delilah's weapon, they were the rebels too. Neighbors hit the streets, knocking on doors, explaining the fraud, showing the sabotage footage, and sharing stories of harassment. For every skeptical homeowner, there were 3 who said, finally, someone's standing up to her. Within a week, they had over half the neighborhood signed on, 50 signatures when they only needed 25. That wasn't just support. That was a mandate. Delilah, of course, didn't go quietly. She called emergency board meetings to stall the petition. She accused Marcus and Sarah of leading a smear campaign. She even claimed the signatures were forged. But the coalition had receipts. Literally. Every signature was notarized, witnessed, and backed by ID. Delilah's denials looked less like leadership and more like flailing. The recall vote was scheduled for a Saturday evening at the community center. And let me tell you, it wasn't just a meeting. It was an event. Families brought folding chairs. Frank showed up in his old army jacket, standing tall like a general at war. Jessica set up snacks on a side table because apparently even rebellions need cookies. The turnout was massive. Out of 100 eligible homeowners, 87 showed up in person. Others mailed in ballots. It was the biggest attendance the HOA had ever seen. You could feel the tension in the room, the kind of electric buzz you get right before a boxing match. Delilah strutted in, head high, heels clicking, clutching her binder like it was a holy text. She gave a speech about community pride and protecting our investments. But her words rang hollow. Everyone had seen the videos. Everyone knew about the money trail. She wasn't protecting the community. She was bleeding it dry. Then Marcus took the floor. Not a polished speaker, not a lawyer, just a man who'd had enough. He told his story plainly. The fines, the harassment, the false reports, the fraud. He showed the photos of vandalism, the footage of Delilah trespassing, and the spreadsheets proving missing funds. His voice wasn't angry. It was steady, calm, controlled. And that made it hit even harder. When he finished, there was silence, then applause, then cheering. The vote was counted, ballot by ballot, signature by signature, and when the final tally was read, it wasn't even close. 72 for recall, 15 against. Delilah had been crushed, not just defeated, but obliterated. The room erupted. People who'd been too scared to speak up before were hugging, high-fiving, and laughing in relief. For the first time in years, the community felt united, not under the boot of a dictator, but as neighbors. Delilah? She stormed out, binder clutched to her chest, muttering about lawsuits and appeals. But her power was gone. Her Lexus peeled out of the parking lot like a villain fleeing the final act. And the best part? The coalition didn't just stop at removing her. They rebuilt. They voted in a new board, balanced, transparent, and actually accountable. Robert the accountant got finance oversight. Jessica joined the community committee. Maria advised on legal compliance. And Marcus? He declined an official position, but everyone knew, without him and Sarah, none of this would have happened. The HOA went from dictatorship to democracy almost overnight, and neighbors who once avoided eye contact were now planning block parties, swapping gardening tips, and laughing about the bad old days of Delilah's reign. The recall vote may have dethroned Delilah, but remember, this wasn't just about rules and strollers anymore. This was about money. And when nearly $350,000 goes missing from HOA funds, you don't just slap someone on the wrist and send them packing. You call in the cavalry. Or, in this case, the auditors, investigators, and the kind of people who carry clipboards that actually matter. It started with Maria, the real estate attorney neighbor, filing an official complaint with the state's Department of Consumer Affairs. Attached? A fat binder stuffed with Robert's spreadsheets, Frank's historical records, Jessica's petition logs, Sarah's incident reports, and Marcus's security footage. It wasn't just a complaint. It was basically a prosecution in a box. All it needed was a bow. Within weeks, investigators showed up. And here's the delicious irony. They did exactly what Delilah had been doing all along. They knocked on doors, they asked questions, they combed through files. Only this time, instead of harassing neighbors over lawn heights, they were tracing her paper trail. And oh, what a trail it was. Remember those consulting fees Delilah had been paying herself? Investigators confirmed they were unauthorized, unsupported by board approval, and straight up fraudulent. The sweetheart contracts to Derek's company? Inflated, rigged, and deliberately split into sub-$25,000 projects to avoid homeowner votes. And those reserve funds that should have been $400,000, Delilah had drained them down to $47,000, using the rest for nonsense like administrative expenses and leadership retreats that turned out to be spa weekends. Spa weekends! While she fined Jessica for leaving a stroller out, she was sipping champagne in a bathrobe, charging it to the community fund. The hypocrisy was almost poetic. But the pièce de résistance? The false police reports. Remember that 911 call claiming Marcus had brandished a weapon? Investigators obtained the recordings. The dispatcher logs showed Delilah's phone number. That little stunt transformed her from corrupt board president to someone who could be charged with filing a false police report, a criminal offense. Suddenly, this wasn't just HOA drama. This was potential criminal prosecution. The neighborhood watched the dominoes fall in real time. One day, Delilah was storming out of meetings, binder clutched like a shield. The next day, she was quietly selling her house, Lexus in the driveway, for sale sign in the yard. Rumor has it she moved 2 counties over, where hopefully she's harassing squirrels instead of homeowners. Meanwhile, Stonegate Estates was healing. With a new board in place, dues were stabilized, contracts were renegotiated, and the reserve funds slowly began to rebuild. Transparency became the new rule. Every financial report was public, every vote documented, every meeting recorded. Neighbors who once avoided each other in fear now swapped barbecue recipes at block parties. And Marcus? For the first time in years, he could park his truck in peace. No fines, no harassment, no deputies on the doorstep. Just a man, his garage, and the satisfaction of knowing that he hadn't just defended his driveway, he had defended his community. Sarah, ever the professional, went back to her detective work, but not before leaving the coalition with one parting gift: a full, organized case file on Delilah, neatly tabbed, chronologically ordered, evidence airtight. Because if prosecutors ever wanted to make an example of a rogue HOA president, they'd have everything they needed. The whole saga became a local legend. Neighbors joked about writing a book, The Dictator in the Lexus. Others wanted t-shirts, I survived Stonegate Estates. And Marcus? He just smiled, knowing that sometimes the best revenge isn't shouting or fighting or even winning an argument. Sometimes the best revenge is watching your enemy self-destruct under the weight of their own arrogance. And the biggest takeaway? HOAs are supposed to protect communities, not strangle them. They're supposed to maintain, not micromanage. When run responsibly, they can keep neighborhoods thriving. But when run by someone like Delilah, they become breeding grounds for corruption, harassment, and full-blown suburban tyranny. Marcus and Sarah proved that you don't have to roll over and take it, that with persistence, documentation, and a united community, even the most power-drunk HOA president can be brought down. And that's the lesson here, not just for Stonegate Estates, but for anyone who's ever been fined for a garden gnome, a basketball hoop, or heaven forbid, a truck in the driveway. So the next time your HOA sends you a violation notice for something ridiculous, remember this story. Remember Marcus, Sarah, and the coalition that took down Hurricane Delilah. And maybe, just maybe, ask yourself, is it time to start a rebellion of your own? If you enjoyed this roller coaster of suburban warfare, don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe for more insane HOA war stories, and drop a comment below. Have you ever dealt with an HOA nightmare? We want to hear your story. And remember, keep your paperwork tight, your neighbors close, and your garden gnomes defiant.